Hey, Jim.
Hello.
Hey, sorry for being a little late today. We're a little late, everybody. Thanks for those of you who have been waiting so patiently to listen to this riveting podcast about quality management. But to be fair, we were testing our stream and recording quality for a ridiculously long amount of time, way more time than we had allocated. Because streaming is super easy and simple, and getting the
5-year-old
technology
can do it.
configured is a no-brainer. Like a monkey could do it.
That's right. But we did it.
We did
You did
it.
it. I
We did it.
was,
We did it. You were a great
dude, I was
cheerleader.
yelling into the mic and bashing things.
This is our like fourth software platform and third hardware platform, and I'm gonna blame Microsoft Teams. I'm choosing to
Always.
blame Microsoft Teams on this particular situation.
Always. I think that is the way to go. I think it's a safe bet.
It
There's
is.
nothing wrong.
It is a safe bet. Well, Jim, how are you, man? How's things?
I'm
How's New
doing
York?
good. New York is good. It's getting to be my favorite seasons. The bugs are going away. It's getting nice and crispy. Nice cool air, and it just smells good. And the leaves are past peak, and so they're all falling. But this is my jam.
Well, I was just
How
gonna
about you?
ask, like you're saying the leaves, the colors are done changing. Everything's gone brown and are falling now.
Going brown. Yep, yep. But now, like I don't know, there's like that smell where the leaves start to get a little wet, and it's like it's decaying leaves, but it smells like just rich dirt. When you get into the woods, uh, uh, uh it gets me jazzed. I like it a lot.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're just barely getting into sub 100-degree weather here in Arizona. Well, that's not fair. Like today's high was 79 here in Arizona, 79, but our low will be 50, right? So this is like the magic time in Arizona where, you wear shorts and hoodies. That's like
Very
that's
good.
the outfit, or you're in some sort of Han Solo looking outfit. That's also
Han
that's
Solo season. That's
that's
right.
also very common here in Arizona, as Mark was wont to say. But this is the time of year. This is why you suffer through the heat. You suffer through the heat because the next 6 months are just like gorgeous weather, while y'all are going to be dealing with snow and really cold stuff. Will be like,
You say that threateningly. I love snow too.
yeah, yeah.
It's so much fun.
It sounds cold.
Oh, it's cold. It's cold as heck, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun. The kids are getting older, and now they can stay out a little bit longer. We can find some good sledding hills and some snowball fights and hot chocolate afterwards. It's a good thing.
How's the Christmas preparation going? Are you already starting to?
We have a rule that we got to get through Halloween before we can think about Thanksgiving. Then we got to get through Thanksgiving before we can think about Christmas.
I think that rule should be a federal law.
Yes, please.
I don't know if Ryan, we've had Ryan on our calls a few times. I don't know if he's out there, but he posted a meme recently that was fantastic. It was like, here's a picture of my Christmas tree in the shed where it
Yes, I
belongs.
saw that.
Because it's like you go from Halloween, you go to Home Depot, right?
Yeah.
You go,
That-
exactly. Home Depot is like the measuring stick of where you're at from a holiday perspective.
yes.
And it's like as soon as it's like they bring out the Christmas stuff before they even get rid of all the Halloween stuff. And I'm like, where's the Thanksgiving stuff? Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday.
It's a
I
goodie.
like Thanksgiving more than Christmas because, well, it's about food. I like food.
And food and gratitude, baby. I mean, what else is there?
You just rhymed. That was impressive.
That's right. That's what I'm about. That's what I'm about.
Anything else going on in the personal stratosphere, sir?
No, no, things are good. Things are good. You?
I got a small marching band update for those of you who have been listening in and keeping up with the saga that is the Williams Field Black Hawk Regiment Marching Band. We took first place in our division for semifinals semifinals. And we have the World Championships. Not like the world of Arizona, but it sounds
Oh,
more impressive when you say world. We have our state championships this Saturday, and we are currently first in our division. We're in Division Two. We don't have the biggest band in the state, which is Division One, but for Division Two, we are leading the pack. It's been really exciting,
that's
but
awesome.
it is awesome. It's been an incredible experience, and it's funny. I've been working with the band director more and more from a leadership perspective, and he's pretty competitive. He likes to go for the wins, right? And so he's like, we can't let the kids know that they're doing too good of a job, because then they're gonna stop practicing. I'm like, you know, and actually, if I can take a moment here, because this is a big deal with me, like from a leadership perspective, like I'm all about pushing and continual improvement and finding, more efficient ways and becoming better at whatever it is that you're doing. But I also really believe that you gotta stop and let people know that they're doing a good job. Especially kids. Like they
Yeah.
want, they don't care about winning as much as he cares about winning, but you know what they do care about? His appreciation of how good they are doing. And so this has been kind of an unexpected leadership level conversation I've been having with the band director, because he's all into leadership and I'm all into leadership. We've been like sharing book titles and all of those things. So I'm excited, man. I'm excited for two reasons. Number one, I think we have a chance of winning. Number two, I'm about to get my Saturdays back.
Oh,
And
yes.
that, my friend, is pretty exciting.
So when is the championship?
It's this Saturday. Oh yeah, it's this Saturday. The only commitment beyond that, so I will not only get my Saturdays back, but I'll get my Tuesday nights, my Thursday nights, and Friday nights back from a football game perspective. But our football team is pretty good as well, and they've made it into playoffs. So that we have our first playoff game this Friday, and if they win that, they go to the next round of playoffs. And as long as they keep winning, the next 4 Fridays of my life are still going to be dedicated to marching band, because we'll be there with the football game. And it's so funny to talk to the marching band people, because they're like, "Yeah, we just hope the football team loses."
we're,
That's
we're
that's
capping.
not that's not team spirit. What are you talking about? You don't want the football team to lose.
uh,
But yeah, that's pretty much the update from my side. I'm excited. It's been an
cool, man.
incredible first season for me in marching band, and then we go into winter drumline, which is, I was like, oh, I've got the rest of the year off. No, I got like 2 to 3 weeks off, and then winter drumline starts, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's all the percussion side of the marching band, right? So it's just
That's
percussion.
cool.
There will be no winds, no none of that, all percussion inside in a gym. So like in the most
Oh, awesome.
reverberant, echoey,
Oh, I love that.
acoustic space, and there's still the pit, so there's still some electronic pieces to it. So I'm interested to see how I'm gonna play a role from that perspective. But yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
that's what we've been up to, man.
Yeah, I feel like that movie Drumline that came out in like the 90s or something completely changed the way everyone looked at um, the pit as well, but also the drumline and marching bands, and it just elevated their game like across the country, I think.
I agree.
That's
I,
cool.
I agree, even though I haven't seen that movie.
Oh no, oh, it's good. Nick Cannon, but some just incredible drum lines.
Dude, I have gotten exposed to marching band this year, and it was a mind blower. I had no idea at all that it goes into. I come to find out, like the guy that writes the program for some of the top marching, like profit marching bands in the country. And to
Mm.
understand, like the concepts that these guys put together for the show, and then they pass it around to different musicians to write the music. And so it goes through
Wow.
like 6 different people's hands as they come up with the concept, and then they come up with the march around that, and then it goes over to the percussion guy, and it goes over to the strings guy, and it goes over to all these different, the brass guy, and they all write their own pieces of music to. It's ridiculous. I was like, whoa, that is an incredible level of coordination. It's cool. It's impressive. It's fun to be a part of it. And that's another leadership conversation. I'm like, yeah, how do you share all of this with the kids? Like, they should know all the effort and energy that goes into creating these experiences. And then when we're done with that show. It's done for the year. Next year it'll be a whole different show, right? They'll write a whole different show, and you'll learn a whole new show and go for it. And so far, my daughter is like, "Yep, I'm in for next year." I'm like, "Cool,
Awesome.
I'm in." Then I'm in for next year.
Awesome.
Okay, well, that's the update, man. That's the personal update. And since we blew through 15 minutes because of our, epic NDI technology testing protocol,
Learning experience. Yeah.
learning experience. That's kind of what quality management is, right? Is a big
Absolutely.
old learning experience.
Absolutely.
Well, dude, kick us off. What's our topic today?
My friends, today we are going to be talking about something that I think a lot of people have questions about. And I know every time we host an AQAV event, every time we host an Avixa event, I get the question at least once or twice, and they want to know what the difference is between the Apex program from Avixa and AV9000, and kind of how they compare. So that's the topic.
That's a big topic.
It is a huge topic.
That's a big topic. I think in the vein of disclosure, right? We both teach for Avixa. We teach certification classes for Avixa, huge Avixa supporters and education supporters, and we're also both on the board of AQAV and support AQAV and AV9000, and that tends to be the quality management system that we've utilized at our organizations. So, well, dude, what's the difference? Like, is it simple? Is it what's the simple difference between the two? Aren't they both just checklists at the end of the day?
Yeah, no, and so that's in my brain. That's where it started, right? Like, how do you compare the set of AV9000 checklists to the ANSI Infocom 10 standard? And I don't think that's fair. And so I think maybe a better setup would be to compare the Apex program, because it's not just a checklist, right? There's a lot more to it. There's, client surveys, there's core value assessments, there's learning initiatives and certification initiatives. And so it's a program. It is a legit program. But we should be comparing the Apex program to the AV9000 compliance program. And I think we'll get some good information there. And so AV9000 compliance is not a full AV9000 certification. It's, you have to attest to the fact that you are at least doing the design review, staging, and commissioning on every project, as well as provide evidence of 6 successful projects. So I think that would be a fair thing. But what is the difference? That's where I don't think there's a simple answer.
That's interesting because you just brought up a really interesting point, because, I mean, take it back a little bit on the AV9000 side. Like, the AV9000 standard is a pretty comprehensive standard that isn't just focused on the commissioning part of the project cycle. But to be AV9000 compliant, you just have to be using the commissioning part of the standard. Is that accurate?
See, I got to look that up. It's been a while, but I thought it was the staging and commissioning part.
Well, I'm going to pull that up while we're sitting
Yeah.
here talking. But even then, it's interesting because the staging and commissioning checklists are very similar. There's a lot of the
Yes.
same tests that happen in both of those tests, or in both of those checklists, and they're still focused on the physical product delivery, so to speak, part of quality, right? And I mean, what are some, if you have them off the top of your head, what are some of the other checklists? What are some of the other aspects of AV9000 from a quality management perspective beyond staging and commissioning?
Sure. So there is the, I don't know where to begin. I suppose it's best to begin at the design review, which is critical, right? And that is a key differentiator, I think, between AV9000 and Apex is that design review. So who is the, reviewing the design, who is making sure it's valid, who is making sure it has performance specifications in there and functional narratives that lay out exactly what's happening. I think that's a big difference. But there's also contract review, there's site readiness, there's the equipment database, like an equipment inventory review, staging, commissioning, acceptance, and project closing. So it's the entire project of it's a iterative testing at key milestones throughout the project, whereas the ANSI Infocom 10 is just the commissioning, the project verification checklist at the very end.
I'm glad you kind of corrected that because you were starting to compare the AV9000 standard to Apex, and that's not a fair comparison because
No.
Apex is actually not a standard. Apex is a designation, right? It's a designation
program, yeah.
saying, or a program, that's better. That's a better way to say it, indicating that you have adhered to a number of different pieces of criteria, including, from my understanding, it could be that you're leveraging the AQAV AV9000 quality management standard, and that still satisfies the requirements for getting Apex designation. Right, so that, and I point this out because I really think it highlights the challenge here. You can't just compare Apex to AV9000. They're kind of two different things. So then to your point, when you're comparing the 10 standard to the AV9000 standard, that might be a good place to start, right? That's, and to your point, the AVIXA 10 standard is verification. So the idea is project is installed, configured, possibly even basic testing, and now we're going to go through and verify all of the performance of the system. One checklist to rule them all, so to speak, at the end of the project.
Yeah.
And if we focus just on AV9000 standard around that side of it, there's the commissioning checklist, which would be the closest thing to compare to the 10 standard. But then there's also the staging checklist, which is focused on validating function of devices in the shop, in the fab shop, right? So again, it's interesting because although AV9000 to me is such a larger quality management process for the whole life cycle of essentially delivering on an AV project, to get AV9000 compliant, it's actually really similar to the requirements from an Apex perspective because it's only focusing in on that commissioning and staging checklist.
Yeah, that's actually, that's pretty fair.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and there, it is interesting. It is interesting, and that's why I think they're built to be similar programs. And another,
the AV9000 compliance and Apex program, to be clear, right? And I'm just trying to keep this straight in my head.
Yeah, and then another big difference is that the 10 standard is an industry standard, right? They followed the ANSI process, which is it's a lift, right? It's a big effort to follow the ANSI accreditation rules, and it takes a really, really long time. Whereas the AV9000 commission, AV9000 standard and that commission check is a de facto standard. So it's run by a small organization, right? AQAV. And there's good and bad to both. On the AVIXA side of things, on that 10 standard, the fact that it's an industry standard is a big deal, right? Because they opened it to the entire industry. They got feedback from representatives from the entire industry, and so there's a big, large buy-in there. As AQAV, not taking away from it, but it's a smaller group of folks, and they're able to revise it each year. So it's a much more nimble. It's a much more nimble standard, and the revisions come a lot quicker. So it's able to pivot a lot faster. Yeah. Yeah, and so
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think that's the big piece, right? In order to bring the group back together from when's the last time the 10 standard had been updated?
As far as I know, I think it was 2013.
Almost 10 years.
Yeah. And that's been the jam. I think they try to revise ANSI standards 5 to 7 years, but because it's such a large undertaking, because it takes so long, it's expensive, right? It's expensive to do. But the fact that you get that buy-in, the fact that you follow those ANSI things from a marketing perspective is actually pretty impressive. And so I am not sure which is the more popular standard, AV9000 or the ANSI Infocom 10 for project verification.
Well, and I will say, like, in just going and reviewing the Apex standard again, not standard. It's not a standard. Apex is not a standard. Apex is a program, right? And going and reviewing the Apex program, they very much welcome the AQAV certifications. And I think there's even an indication, I was just reading it right now as you were talking, that you don't necessarily have to use the 10 standard. You can use your own process internally that still holds you to the same level of criteria and performance verification that the 10 standard indicates. Obviously, you've got to apply for that, and it has to be approved by AVIXA at the end of the day. But I would imagine that if you're an organization that has invested into AV9000 and is using the AV9000 criteria and checklist to drive quality within your organization, you could use that to go get the Apex program designation.
100%.
And why? And in my mind, it's kind of like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? It's not. Yeah. What I love about that is that it's not saying, hey, look, you have to use the 10 standard. No, you don't have to use the 10 standard. We're saying that the 10 standard is an ANSI certified standard that we put out into the space, and it's meeting all the criteria. And if you have your own process, your own documented process that you can show proof of, we'll give you that Apex designation. And I think that is a bit of an eye opener for me, because I think I struggled with the idea of, like, it's one or the other, right? You have to do either one or the other, and that's not the case at all. And again, coming back to the fact that Apex in and of itself isn't the standard. It's a program it's ensuring that you've invested in your company, invested in quality processes, invested in education, invested in best practices.
Yeah.
So have you dug into the 10 checklist?
I have, and I think there are some big differences between that and the commissioning checklist and AV9000. So for me, the biggest takeaway, what I appreciate about the AV9000 is through the whole AV9000 process, they encourage you to put in those performance specifications. And if there are none, part of the AV9000 process is to assume them and list them. And in the checklist itself, it has those starting points. For signal to noise, we're going to put in 55 dB. For headroom, we're going to put in 15 dB. So it gives you a starting point. I think one of the shortcomings of the 10 standard is that there are no starting points. I believe what it says is it should perform as defined in the project documentation. And why I think that's a shortcoming, like if the project documentation, if the design package was stellar, right? It had the narrative, it had performance specifications, it had everything laid out, that'd be fantastic. But I can't tell you how many times a design package is an equipment list.
Yeah.
Right.
Where's the performance spec?
Yeah. There's no performance spec, and so to satisfy the 10M, the 10 standard, if the design package has nothing going on, then you can satisfy it. Like rather, there's nothing to satisfy. So you can verify because that project verification checklist is so dependent on the project documentation. I feel like that's a shortcoming. I really feel like you need to seed that checklist with some kind of basic metrics or like starting point metrics.
And and obviously we have that in the AV9000 standard, although we encourage designers to look at it on a project by project, application by application basis 100%. And make modifications.
Yeah, all the metrics are put into parentheses so that it's called out. This is where you can start from. This is what AQAV recommends. But by all means, if the design, if the project documentation has different values, use those. And I like that.
I do too. Yeah, I have an anecdotal story on that where we took the default metrics within the checklist and commissioned a space based on those metrics and did not account for what the actual ambient noise was going to be in the space filled with alcohol imbibing adults standing around cocktail tables. And it was a very embarrassing moment for me because the mayor of the city stepped up to the lectern and started talking, and he was coming out of the speakers at a good 70 dB, but those 100 people in that room were well above 70 dB, and it was that moment of like, oh, this is what you mean by, understanding that what works in a conference room doesn't necessarily work in a VIP lounge that's going to have a bunch of lubricated people that you need to ultimately be able to get above for a moment so that you can quiet them down. It was a big deal. But anyway, just an interesting anecdote around, to your point, having a starting point, having those starting numbers, because I haven't done a huge review personally of the 10 checklist in a while. It's been several years since I've picked it up. Obviously, it sounds like it probably hasn't changed since I actually picked it up. But isn't there several tests that don't require putting a number to it?
100%.
Inspection tests and.
Yeah. Well, and that's that. I mean, that's the other thing. And I'm trying to wrap my head around if it's a benefit or a challenge. It is such an exhaustive test. There are so many. It's really big. Like I think it's very exhaustive, right? And that's because it's an industry standard. They got experts from all different aspects of the industry together, and they said, all right, if you were concerned about electrical power and grounding, what test would you do that? And so they included like 40 tests there. And then if you were concerned about video, so it is a monster checklist, whereas the AV9000 is more nimble, more generic, and more of a grass catcher.
Yep.
And there's efficiency there. There's cost to consider, but there's also catching everything every time. So
I
I
mean,
haven't.
isn't that's the definition of quality, right? Catching everything every time, consistency.
Yeah, yeah. But you also have a business to run where so it might take you, let's say, 4 hours to complete the AV9000 checklist. It might take you, you know, 8 or 12 to complete the 10 checklist. And then is that a barrier to adoption?
You know,
Because it's so big.
sorry, no, continue.
Yeah, no, because it's so big, is that too intimidating for someone to adopt on every single system?
You know, it's interesting that you brought that up because at level three, when we first started to adopt the AV9000 standard, there was a huge pushback on the time that it would take to
Mhm.
complete the checklists. And it's those moments when you find issues that you're like, oh, yeah, this is why
Yeah.
we do the checklist, right? And you hope that you just run through the checklist and there's no issues. And then there starts to be this little bit of a voice in the back of your head of like, do we really need to take all the time to do this if we're not really finding any issue? And then you find an issue and you're like,
Mhm.
this is
Yeah.
why we do it. But it speaks to the winning of the hearts and minds within the organization to spend the money from a quality perspective. And I say money because it's all comes down to dollars and cents at the end of the day. Time is our most precious commodity, not only in the cost of that time, but in the delivery of a system to a customer by a particular date and time. You know,
Mhm.
and it's interesting. There's a couple of comments. I don't know if you're looking at the Facebook. Number one, we're in the presence of greatness. We got Espinosa. We got Mr. Power and Grounding himself, Tom Kerr. I know,
Fantastic.
I know. Good God, we should have known this 15 minutes ago. I'd be a lot more nervous. And then Mr. Watts, and Watts had a really good comment, right? A lot of times, sadly, performance standards are omitted due to the cost in meeting them. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what you're speaking to right now.
Yeah, and that it's the same to the ACU industry standard, the audio coverage, uh,
Uniformity.
uniformity of
Yep.
coverage. It was, and I think this speaks to the difference between de facto standards and industry standards. Industry standards are going to come out every 5 to 10 years. And so you want to make it as robust as possible because it is going to have to live that way. Whereas de facto standards, you can put something out, try it for a year, and know that you're going to get the revision committee back for a year. And if people are complaining about something, if people who are using it on the daily notice something, you can improve it the next year or sooner than that. It's a de facto standard. It's not accredited by any means. So yeah, it's just that robustness. And like Justin is saying, it's expensive. It's expensive to do that.
Yeah, Tom just put out, if it adds to overhead, it's not likely to be adopted. The integrator wants to get in, measure, document, and get out as quickly as possible so they can get on to the next job. Which, like that is such a point of conversation right there, right? Do you charge the cost of quality to the project, or is it considered overhead? This is one of the most common conversations that I end up having in the classes is, are you putting the time into the job for the quality, or is it a cost of doing business? Is it looked
Right.
at more from an overhead perspective? And then what's the cost of, okay, so great, you want to get in, you want to get out, and you want to move on to the next job as quickly as possible, but what happens if you don't complete? What happens if something doesn't work the way that it's supposed to? What's the cost of that?
Yeah.
And that's a
Yeah.
little harder to quantify at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's been, one of the guiding principles of the checklist management at AQAV is it needs to be minimal yet sufficient. So the focus and I feel like that's another difference is the 10 standard wanted to capture everything because it's that industry standard. It wants to encompass all. Whereas the AQAV checklist really pays attention to efficiency, right? And they don't want to just inundate you with checklist items. They want a lean and mean commissioning checklist.
That makes a lot of sense. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many check items there are on the 10 standard?
Because it's split up into different categories, and there are many, many pages. And like the 10 standard that goes through each test is 300 pages long. And then they have a guide of the standard, which is 53 pages long, but there's no count of the tests there. I think, and I think there's like 60 or 80 in the commissioning check, but yeah, it's pages and pages. There are oh, 20. Yeah.
So while you're looking that up, I'm gonna for the record of the call, I've got both the Apex program and the AV9000 compliance program to just get a real sense of what is it required to achieve Apex, what is it what is it required to achieve AV9000 compliant, both being programs, both being differentiators, both showing, in my opinion, an investment in quality and an investment in best practices from an industry perspective. So the Apex side, the first thing they do is they divide it based on company size. So there's a 1 to 24, there's a 25 to 99, and there's a 100 plus company. And from my just cursory looking at it, it just has to do with the percentage of employees that you have with AV
Right.
certification. So on the small side, all of them have to have conformance to AVIXA standards, and it requires 40 points a year. And this is where it gets a little bit flexible. Conformance to both AVIXA standards, which is the 2M 2010, the design criteria, right? Which, just as a quick aside, really interesting that the 10 standard for verification doesn't have that performance specification requirement built into it, because so much of what AVIXA is about within CTSD is quantifying your designs with a number so that you
Yes.
can then verify those numbers with the verification process. So that's interesting. I would have loved to have been a part of the committee and maybe understood what the thought process was for not even referencing back. Well, I guess it does. It references back to whatever the design documents say. So does the 2M 2010 design standard have a requirement for providing performance verification or performance specifications?
Not that I know of. I know there was one coming, a revision coming out, but I haven't seen it. But the, the, in my opinion, the 2M was more of a guideline because it listed um, and it did a great job of capturing all the different design documentation that is out there, but it never really detailed when it should be used, when it has to be used to make it a complete design package. So it said, it was that gray book. Here's 100 different types of drawings that you can use, but it's up to you as the designer to know when to use it. So
Yeah,
in my opinion, that's not really a verifiable standard. That's more of here's some incredible examples.
and some best practices depending
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
requirements of
yeah.
your design. Okay, so going back to this, conformance to both AVIXA standards or conformance through internal processes of your own. And it mentions that 2M 2010 and 10 2013 are or met exceeded AVIXA standard requirements through internal processes of your own. So I would imagine that the AV9000 process for verification would meet the standards, would meet the requirements here. That would be my guess, and I think we'll vet that out on our own. The next one is AVIXA certifications, saying 30% of total employees must have a CTS. Customer response survey, right, conducted through a third-party organization. For a small company, you have to have 2 positive customer response surveys.
Mhm.
There's the core values agreement, which I think the core values, if I recall, is the AVIXA core values, right? This is the
Yes.
this is kind of the typical Avixa. You align with our core values and agree to support them, and we will, help badge you with our brand. Additional CTS certified staff. So this is where you can get optional points awarded for specialized. So it looks additional points awarded at 2 points for each additional CTS and 3 points for your CTSD, CTSI for a maximum of 15 points a year. You also have an additional option, 1 point awarded for just each Avixa course taken, which, I love this because, again, it's promoting education and professional development, continuing to hone in your skills within your staff. And then it's got additional Apex approved certifications, and you can get points for each of these. And I'm just opening it up real quick here, and it's got a ton of what looks to be manufacturer-specific certifications. It's got some industry certifications like CompTIA, and I'm going all the way down because I want to see. Oh, and it includes CQD, CQT, which are the certifications from the Association of Quality in AV, or AQAV. So it seems like, again, Avixa's approach to Apex is ensuring that whether you're using their standard or you have your own internal processes, that you've invested in achieving a particular level of or a minimum level of conformance through those processes, which I think is fantastic. It's changed from when they first launched it, because if I recall, when they first launched it, it was you need to do the 10/2013 verification checklist and show completed checklists. And then when you go to the medium and large side, it's really just a difference of the percentage of employees having Avixa, and then the customer response surveys. You need to have more customer response surveys the larger the organization is. Going over to the AV9000 compliance side, pulling this up real quick, and to confirm what we mentioned earlier, it is both the staging and commissioning checklist with signed affidavit. So there's some affirmations, right, that you have a quality policy, that it provides a framework, that you have procedures in place that use those applicable checklists. It includes a commitment to satisfy applicable customer requirements, includes a commitment to continual improvement of the quality management system. So that's kind of your affirmations that you're aligned with, for lack of a better term, kind of the core values of AV9. Like that's how I kind of view that, in looking at it. And then you have to have 6 projects that have been completed and submit evidence for audit by AQAV's quality audit department. And that's completed staging reports with signed affidavits and detailed information such as measurements and observations, completed commissioning reports with the same supporting data, same customer acknowledgments of satisfactory completion of all promised deliverables. So again, kind of that document showing that the customer agrees that you delivered what you said you were going to deliver. To take it a bit further here, in that you have to list all of your test equipment used to acquire the measurements recorded in the reports. And I think that's interesting, because some of the tests in the AV9000, you can't just get that stuff with your standard toolkit. You do require some specialized tools to be able to accomplish that. But it also then keys in on the calibration of those tools and keeping up on the calibration of those tools, coming back to kind of that consistency. A digital photograph of the test instruments. You have a conference audit, so there's actually a conversation, and then that lasts for 1 year. I didn't actually see on the Apex side if there was a limit in the designation and if you had to continue to go through. I'm going to do some research on that.
Yeah, the requirements seem to make it sound like it's per year.
That would make sense.
Yeah. And so that's another major difference, right? Is that obviously Avixa is going to put a lot of emphasis on certifications and education and things of that nature to show alignment with their core values. And AQAV, the AV9000 compliance, is really just focusing on meeting user needs. So the individual certifications aren't really a factor in the AV9000 compliance, because as long as you can prove that you are following the stage and commissioning checklist, that you have the capability of doing them with the test equipment, and you're attesting to the fact that you do it, and you get those 6 client surveys, that's evidence that you're walking the walk, And Avixa, on the flip side, is saying, they're asking for 2 surveys, or depending on the size of your company, but also they are putting that value in individual certifications, which it's just 2 sides of the coin. I don't know which one is better
I
per
don't
se,
disagree with that. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, even on the AV9000 side, like we say, you really need to have these Avixa certifications.
Yeah.
Because they apply to the knowledge base that we need you to have before you're ready to, take that step into that next commissioning. You need to have it. Like we promote it. We promote it with an AQAV. AQAV is not here to teach people how to design and how to install. Avixa does an incredible job of doing that, and you need those. So it's interesting. It kind of feels like, is that a missing component of AV9000 compliancy?
That's where I'm torn. I mean, obviously, if your company has more CTS, CTSI, CTSD, you have that commitment to education and certification, which is huge, right? And that is a great benefit to your clients. At the same time, those certifications don't necessarily mean that they're going to be doing a good job. They maybe they just got lucky, or they're good test takers. So there's nothing guaranteeing a client that the fact that you have 4 CTSDs on your staff, there's nothing guaranteeing that every design your company puts out is going to meet client standards, client needs.
Okay, I can get on board with that. Although, like, again, I'm kind of reading down the AV9000 compliancy, and when it comes to the reports, it is requiring that those reports are signed off by CQD, CQT personnel. So it's almost implied within the...
Are they?
That's submit the following informations for 6 projects. Staging report showing support information and measured readings and comments. Signature of qualified personnel, CQD, CQT. That to me implies that you must have certified individuals on staff. Right. So it is a focus on individual skills and certifications as well. And that aligns. I mean, it even has it on the checklist, right? Right at the bottom where you would sign the checklist, it said signed by qualified personnel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Well, that's it. Those are the 2 programs, if you will,
yeah.
Which I think the 2 programs are pretty similar, but when you start to peel back that first layer and look at the standards itself, right? The AV9000 standard and the width of the AV9000 standard versus the 10 standard, or really focused on that verification at the end. Do you see Chuck's comment about how many items were on the 10? There's over 160 plus test items on the 10.
Yeah, I counted about 200, and there's about 80-ish on the commissioning checklist.
I remember the first time I did it, and I was like, "There's so many tests here," and now you do it so often that
breeze through it.
And it is an interesting concept that I think you've brought forth around almost, I don't want to say minimally viable product, but that's kind of how it feels from that perspective. Like, how do you stay as lean as possible and measure the most important things to guarantee a particular outcome versus, you can always go above and beyond, but at what point does that above and beyond not actually serve to deliver the outcome that you're trying to deliver, while while keeping in balance that business side of it, the profitability side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and to Justin's point, how we've got a lot of rooms that have been sitting dormant for so long. How great would it be if someone could go around commissioning them to make sure that they're ready for business? And at that point, I would want to be as lean as possible, but as complete as possible. That's the challenge.
Well, man, I think we're at the end of our time here, but this was a conversation I've been really excited to have for a while now, because they're the only real two in the industry that I know that are about, trying to signify that you're going after a higher degree of quality and verification. And I learned a lot, because I think one is not necessarily, they're not mutually exclusive.
No, no, and any focus on quality management, right, is going to have a huge benefit on your results, on your outcomes.
100%. I think we need to go get Apex certified, buddy.
I think so. I think it's about that time.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks for another great conversation, and looking forward to hooking up again here in about, what, 2 weeks? 4 weeks? 4 weeks.
4 weeks. 4 weeks.
And to the Power AV crew that decided to join us today, it's like getting the band back together.
That's right.
There's some great commentary going from Justin about how Tom's CTSD was chiseled into stone tablets. Yes. We love you, Tom. We love you.
Yes, we do, brother.
All right, man. Have a good night. Thanks again.
Yeah. You too, and thank you guys for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.